So tonight we'll be having a presentation by Stephanie Malcher and Wondu Amenu on the city data for powering solutions to homelessness. Stephanie is the manager of strategic programs for the city's Shelter, Support, and Housing Administration, the SSHA division, and is joined by Wondu Amenu, a research analyst at the SSHA. Tonight, they'll be discussing the City of Toronto's new shelter system dashboard, the shelter system flow. The data is also available on the Open Data portal and will be used to inform ongoing efforts to develop permanent solutions to address homelessness, a best practice among other North American cities that have achieved reductions in chronic homelessness. So without further ado, please welcome them, and I will stop my share and leave it up to them.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here. It's really funny to see yourself captioned on the bottom of the screen as you go, and I feel like it's actually good for me because I tend to speak quite fast. So maybe if it gets behind or can't hear what I'm saying, then I'll know to slow down. So Wondu and I are really excited to be here. I'm just going to share my screen to start. As was introduced, we both work at SSHA, and we both work with a team in the division called the Coordinated Access Team. So I'm the manager of the team, and I work with a team of people who do design and policy development work, as well as an operational team who connect people who are currently experiencing homelessness to housing opportunities, permanent housing opportunities. And we also work really closely with our IT team at SSHA to improve systems that we use to support that transition from homelessness to housing for people who are experiencing homelessness in Toronto. So Wondu is one of the members of that team. He's our research analyst and has been absolutely essential to getting this data that we're about to walk you through and share with you up on our website. We're really excited to have it there, and coming to this group was one of the things that I had kind of identified early on that I wanted to do, knowing I have some connections through the group, some people here who I know and others in the civic tech community, and know the great work that comes out of this group. And so was really excited to bring this here and kind of share it with you, and then perhaps work together where we might see there are opportunities to collaborate. So to get started, actually, so one thing that I might want, now that I've shared my screen, it's a bit hard to, but if someone wants to share the link in the chat as well, that would be really helpful to the shelter system flow data. Either Wondu, you can do that, or I'm sure others have it. It was on the invite as well, because people can obviously have a look at it as we kind of talk about it as well. So to get us started, I just kind of want to give you some high level background about this shelter system flow data and why we decided to do this. So as I said, my work is around designing and developing a coordinated access system in Toronto. And a coordinated access system is a system which applies a consistent approach to identifying, assessing, prioritizing, and connecting people to permanent housing opportunities that meet their needs in a way that's consistent across the entire system. So often what we've found in the past is that different services use different types of approaches. A lot of it depends on who you know and what you know, and what your workers know is one of the reasons why you may or may not get housed if you're experiencing homelessness. So we want to reduce that kind of experience of having your experience of homelessness be dependent on the person who you're working with and their connections, and really kind of centralize that approach to connecting people with housing opportunities that are going to end their experience of homelessness. So developing this system is now a requirement of some federal funding that the city and SSHA receive. So the funding is called Reaching Home funding. And this approach of a coordinated access system is consistent with a lot of other North American jurisdictions. It was really started in the States and now has been adopted by the Canadian federal government, but also the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness through a campaign called Built for Zero. And that campaign is really grounded in the idea that you need to have good, consistent data, accurate data, and frequent access to data to measure any progress that you're making in relation to ending homelessness and reducing homelessness in your city. So that's kind of the foundation for why we kind of pursued this approach and wanted to get this data in a place where we were able to share it publicly. It also is really strongly supported by other kind of city commitments to using data to inform solutions to homelessness. So one of them is the Housing TO Action Plan, which states that will better connect people experiencing homelessness to housing and supports by developing and regularly reporting on specific performance indicators and targets that measure progress towards ensuring that when homelessness is experienced in Toronto, that it's rare, brief, and non-recurring. So we've worked in collaboration with various partners within the city, including our corporate IT division as well, to design the Tableau dashboard, as well as the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness and the Toronto Indigenous Community Advisory Board, who have worked closely with us on kind of reviewing and vetting some Indigenous data, which I'm going to speak to a little bit later as well. So when you look at the dashboards, the data that you're looking at, and if you're downloading the data from the Open Data Portal, the data that you're looking at is reflective of people who have experienced homelessness in the shelter system in the past 3 months. So right now, the system that we use is limited to our shelter system, which includes shelters, 24-hour respite services, warming centres, hotel motel programs, many of them which have been opened in response to the COVID to increase social distancing in actual shelter sites. We're currently working with a handful of street outreach providers to introduce them to our data management information system so that we can include people who are exclusively sleeping outdoors. One thing that I want to highlight is that if someone who's sleeping predominantly outdoors but uses an overnight space at least once every 3 months will be included in this data. But if they sleep exclusively outdoors, then that's when they're not reflected here. And that's just a really important piece to highlight, because I don't want people to think that this is everyone who's experiencing homelessness when we know that there are some gaps. The goal is to close those gaps and to eventually get this to a place where it is reflecting most people who are experiencing homelessness in Toronto. So we have some enhancements underway to include racial identity, Indigenous identity, and veteran status in the dashboards as well. So that's work that's currently happening, and again speaks to our partnership with our IT team in terms of adding those questions, and then obviously a lot of communication and training that are needed. That needs to be done with frontline staff to ensure that they're able to ask questions and work with clients specifically on asking those questions. One of the things, I'm really proud of this dashboard, and I know that, it's been a huge amount of work for my team and for others at the city. And one thing that was really exciting when we shared this with our partners at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness is that they called it once we have those folks who are sleeping outdoors in this dashboard included here, they kind of highlighted that it would be the most comprehensive snapshot of its kind in North America, and that was really exciting for us to hear. And we're super excited that Toronto is able to be at kind of the forefront of this and be leading some of this work, and that other municipalities can look to the work that we've done and get inspiration and ask us how we did it, and kind of work to also improve and reduce homelessness in their own communities. So as I said, the information here includes people who are sleeping in shelters, respite programs, warming centres, and hotel motel programs. programs. And the data is collected when someone accesses or enters into one of those services. So the data is recorded in our Shelter Management Information System, or SMIS, as we call it. And frontline staff enter that information based on responses that they get from people who are accessing those services. So I pulled a couple screenshots just for people to see, just very basically what this might look like. This is all dummy data, just to be very clear. But you'll see, you know, they're obviously asked personal information, their name, gender, pronouns, and then there's a bunch of different questions here around demographic information. And then there's also information about when people leave the shelter. So that's information that's collected when people enter the shelter system or enter shelter. And then there's information that's recorded when people leave shelter about where they move to. So discharge, disposition, and discharge reason in terms of where they went to and the reason that they went there are also recorded. And that's the information that kind of drives this data and informs this data and powers the dashboard. So, I mean, some of this hopefully is obvious to people about why we're doing this. But, you know, as I said, it's really been shown to be a best practice approach across North America around being able to use data to really illustrate how and why certain interventions to homelessness are working and how and why some might not be. So we're really interested in using this dashboard and using this data to inform a lot of those decisions from a policy perspective, in terms of the work that we do around policy development and implementation, but also in terms of operations, how we operate our shelter system and how we operate and fund housing providers and that kind of thing. Previously, a lot of the data that we've released has focused pretty exclusively on nightly occupancy and capacity. That information is super important, and you'll see that information on the city website as well. There's no doubt that that's important. However, it really provides a very limited snapshot of what's happening within the shelter system. It's not looking at unique people. It's really just a one-time overnight kind of snapshot of who's staying in the shelter system. And this data, because it captures those people over the past 3 months and looks at people coming into the shelter system, how long they stay, and then people leaving, really gives us a much more robust and rich understanding of people's experiences of homelessness, and it becomes much more valuable than those other measures that we've been using in the past. I've covered the rest here. So I'm going to hand it off to Wondu, who's going to talk about the different data elements that are reflected in the dashboard, and then we'll get to some questions.
Okay, thank you, Steph. So you can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. So the dashboard has 2 components. I shared the link to the page if you can see it, or later on towards the end, I think we are going to show you the demonstrations for the 2 dashboards. The first dashboard is a monthly snapshot. So that in the next slide, I'm going to show you the detailed elements of those key data points. And then we have the historical trends starting from January of 2020. That's where we have a good quality data according to our assessment. So starting from January 2020, we have all the 6 data elements analyzed for all other population groups as well that we are going to highlight for you towards the end of this presentation. So users will be able to filter data by subpopulation. We have different subpopulation categories based on their demographics, like whether they are refugees or youth or family, non-refugees. And then we have another definition that indicates whether they are chronically homeless or not. Later on, I will define what we mean by chronic homelessness. So all these criteria are or categorized into as subpopulation, which can be selected from a drop-down menu to look at the data, the pattern from month to month, starting from January 2020. So this dashboard is the first was published on March 1st for the months of starting from January 2020 to the end of February. And now we released this week for the latest data for February. So the one published on March 1 was up to the end of January, and now we released this month on March 15, including to the end of February of 2021. So instead, in addition to this dashboard, we have also the open data, which gives the detailed data in CSV file format. So these are the main key data points. So the first one, if you click for me, Steph, I think it's going to show. Yeah. So we have so at the end of every month, we enumerate how many people are remaining as active according to our operational definition. So at the end of February, for February 2021, for instance, the one we published on March 15, we had 7,871 individuals who were actively homeless at the end of the month of February. Next, please. So when we further categorize those individuals, we have inflow, those individuals who are coming into the shelter system, and then we have outflow at the end of the month, those individuals who have been either permanently housed or who have no recent contact with the shelter system. So in the month of February, we had 1,067 who entered into our shelter system. So this inflow, we have 3 different categories. So the first is newly identified. So those individuals are based on the SMIS, Shelter Management Information Systems, that we have indicated to you before. Those individuals are individuals who were for the first time admitted into an overnight service for the first time ever. So those are newly identified. So in February, we had 590 individuals of these characteristics. The second is return from permanent housing. Those are individuals who were previously in our shelter system and then permanently housed. So in the current months of reporting, they came back to the shelter system. So those are successfully housed previously some time ago, and then now they are back to the shelter system. In the month of February, we had 88 of such individuals. So the third is return to shelter. This could be like a bit, it may look like, in terms, literally may look like it has a second definition, but when we say return to shelter, what we are saying is those individuals who were previously not permanently housed, but for whom we don't really know whether they were permanently housed or not. So they were in the shelter system, but they had no contact for a minimum of 3 months, and then they came back to the shelter system this month. So for these characteristics, we had 389 of them in the month of February. So when we say inflow, we have newly identified, return from permanent housing, and return to shelter after we have lost contact with them for more than 3 months. And then the next is the outflow, the exit. In February, we had 967 individuals exiting the shelter system, and this exit is measured from 2 variables. So the first exit is move to permanent housing. Those are individuals who we were able to successfully house them in the month of February. So we had 297 of them who were successfully permanently housed in the month of February. And then the second variable is no recent shelter use. Those are individuals who had no bed night in the past 3 months. So they were discharged in the past 3 months, and now we classify them as no recent shelter use. So 3 months is our definition. So those individuals, when they come back to shelter system sometime ago in the future, they will be classified as return to shelter, as entry sometime in the future if they come back. So for this group, we have 670 of them who were previously who didn't have like contact with us for more than 3 months, and now they came back to our shelter system. They were 670 in February. And similarly, therefore, because we have inflow and outflow, now we measure, so what is the change now? So ideally, we will expect, because our goal is to reduce homelessness through time. So ideally, we will expect this number to decrease. That's our strategic planning. But this month, we have plus, because of different situations, this can happen. So we have plus 100. So inflow was more than outflow in the month of February, according to our data. So one critical point to monitor in addressing homelessness is to pick the chronic homelessness part from the whole population of homelessness, because that is a critical element of an extended period of experiencing homelessness. So that is also part of the monitoring plan we have for this dashboard. So what do we mean by chronic homelessness? We have a federal definition for chronic homelessness. So there are two criteria. The first criteria is if the person has recorded a minimum of 180 overnight stays in the past year. So we make this one in collaboration with IT from our organization. We have developed a parameter to capture this. So if a person has experienced more than 180 bare nights in the past year, the person will be classified as chronic. So most individuals are classified as chronic based on this criteria. The second criteria we have is if a person has more than 546 overnight stays cumulatively over a recurrent period of homelessness experience in the past 3 years, then that individual is also classified as chronic. So as I explained to you, most people, more than around 90%, are classified as chronic based, because of fulfilling the first criteria of more than 180 bare nights in the past year. This follows the federal definition for chronic homelessness. Again, the other key point is when we say newly identified, for example, when we say this person is new to shelter system, it may literally imply that the person is newly admitted. But for chronic, the definition is, let's say, if the person is not chronic in January and the person turned out as chronic in February, then we classify that as newly identified as chronic. So it doesn't mean the person is new to shelter system. The person is staying there in the shelter system, but newly classified as chronic. Yeah, I think that's my part. Thank you.
Thanks, Wondu.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to highlight a few kind of key steps that we're working on currently. So I mentioned before our partnership with the Toronto Indigenous Community Advisory Board. We're currently working with them on releasing the Indigenous data, subpopulation data. We do have that data currently. That question is asked when people enter shelter. However, the question was recently updated, and so we're waiting to get to a point where enough people have been asked the updated question with updated response options that we developed and co-designed with our Indigenous partners before we release that Indigenous data. And we're working with them. They're responsible for approving that data before it's released, and that's why it doesn't appear in this initial version of the dashboard. As I said, we're also looking to introduce questions across the system around racial identity and veteran status. And those questions are being introduced in the coming months. We'll then wait for those questions to be asked of clients as they enter the shelter system. And once we get to a point where we have sufficient level of data, then we'll add those filters into the dashboards as well. I'll highlight that the veteran status is there. It's one of the federally mandated questions that we need to ask. You may have seen that a lot of communities in the States really focus on ending veteran homelessness as one of their kind of targets for their municipalities and their cities. It's not specifically been identified as a target here, but it is something that the federal government is asking that we gather data on. And then the other thing that Wondu is doing is doing a more in-depth analysis that can supplement the information that's shared publicly on the dashboard. So he's working on kind of a more granular analysis of those data points, looking at more specifically, where are people coming from, where are they going to when they go to permanent housing, but also where are they going to when they don't go to permanent housing. So you'll see that quite large number of no recent shelter use every month, and doing some more in-depth analysis around where those people are actually going to is going to be really helpful in informing kind of some of our solutions and some of our actions in response to this data. So I have this here. This is kind of the ask that we're coming to you with today. And one of the things that we're hopeful that and interested in having a conversation about is for a start, what works and what doesn't work with this dashboard. I know for me, I've had a lot of conversations with people in the housing and homelessness field around what's here, but not that many conversations with people who aren't in that world. And it's very interesting to me to think about how do we leverage other communities and other expertise that aren't specifically focusing on housing and homelessness, but I'm really interested to hear kind of what your thoughts are on that. If you're not in that field, I realize some people here might be. So, you know, thinking about how might you visualize the data differently, what additional data would help to make this more valuable, and how can both we as the city, as policymakers and funders, use this data to inform decisions, but also how can the broader community use this data to support their work in a way that's effective. And really at the end of the day helps to reduce homelessness in Toronto.